Good evening, welcome back to my channel. Yes, it's been a while since I've been with you, since I've had a story to read. I've been quite busy launching my first novel, Elena in Exile. I'll be telling you more about that soon, but for now I have another short story based on 5 random words. Just a little reminder, if you enjoy my short stories, that you will find them, many of them, in a collection called Running Coyote and Fallen Star, available by order from bookshops or online at the usual places. Anyway, this story is based on the following 5 random words. And it's called Lunacy. Diffraction Books were a niche publisher amongst niche publishers. Their compact yearly slate typically included 3 or 4 works of esoteria, Wiccan rituals, Kabbalah, late 1950s psilocybin-empowered poets, inscrutable modern gender theory, a couple of slim poetry volumes, and equally few obscure novels. Diffraction specialised in the kind of books that rarely troubled either the London Review of Books or the staff selection tables at Waterstones. We dangle proudly between 2 stools, their editor-in-chief Bill Thorncroft had once proudly announced at the launch of Lucinda Lamprey's seaweed-themed volume, Forsworn Foreshores. Lamprey was the kind of poet who eschewed punctuation, capital letters, and conventional sense-making in all her verse. A sample, bladderwrack and kelp, curlicues of cured sea tongue, whispering sensational nothings, beckon with blissful strangulation. Diffraction was situated in a snug, cobbled alley hidden somewhere in Margate's Old Town, in a location cunningly designed to baffle all visitors and guests, making everyone at least 15 minutes late for their first, and often their second, meetings with Thorncroft and his harried assistant Jez Bell, remarkably their real name. Today's guest was no exception. A full half-hour late, he seemed to lean at an untenable angle, and one at odds with the equally unlikely inclination of Diffraction's office, which had begun subsiding in the late 18th century and somehow hadn't yet collapsed. Thin as a winter twig, tall as one of the red and white striped poles that demarcated the beach, and beady of eye, Mr. Ian Cubitt was an enigma even by Diffraction poet standards. He had won his meeting by mailing Thorncroft a single sheet of blackened paper which seemed to contain no writing whatsoever, until the publisher received a terse text message exhorting him to breathe life into it. Feeling even more foolish than he did during his passive-aggressive meetings with his accountant, Thorncroft had locked himself in the downstairs loo and had done as instructed. Amazingly, pale grey text then appeared on every millimetre of the A5 sheet, a spiral of graphomanic brilliance, telling the story of a young woman determined to teach herself to fly by capturing, observing, and dissecting birds. A full 12,000-word novella printed in 6-point handwriting on one side of a blank, black sheet of onion skin paper. The story had fallen apart in his sweaty palms, yet had left Thorncroft with a distinct impression of genius, and the irritating realisation that he'd actually have to meet this Cubitt chap. Cubitt attended his meeting, dressed in a tight-fitting, jet-black, 3-piece suit with no adornments and a Japanese collar. His personal grooming was punctilious, his moustache trimmed to perfection. He spoke with the ghost of a lisp, and his tiny dark eyes darted hither and thither from behind gold-rimmed spectacles which seemed to contain no glass. Nobody dared question this choice. "I am Ian Wilmington Cubitt," he said, shaking Thorncroft's plump hand as they walked up the creaking stairs to the musty office where Diffraction produced its unreadable oeuvre. "Pleased to meet you," huffed the considerably rotund Thorncroft, rounding the corner to perform a comic dance around Miss Bell, who carried a tray of tea things into the boardroom in advance of the publisher and his guest. "I must say," Thorncroft continued, "I'm very excited about this moonlit launch idea. We've never done anything quite like it. I'm rather glad you twisted my arm." Cubitt merely nodded magnanimously, as if he was bestowing a kindness on Thorncroft, rather than insisting upon an insanely risky PR stunt to launch a book whose text Thorncroft hadn't even seen. Although this was the first meeting between the two men, they had communicated in a multiplicity of text messages over the intervening weeks. Cubit's only accepted method of communication until now. Cubit referred to his ancient Nokia as his pocket telegraph and sent brief, unadorned messages which were oddly compelling. Thorncroft had dealt with authorly egos of all shapes and colours, from the youthful hothead to the smug, matronly polymath. However, Cubit belonged to a category of his own. There was something about the eccentric, cadaverous poet that made Thorncroft certain he couldn't express a single word of criticism or doubt. Cubit was a creature of ice-pure, coal-black will. Before the meeting, Thorncroft had reread their text communications to ensure he wasn't about to make a catastrophic mistake. What was it that Cubit had promised? Lunacy of the utmost proportions, an evisceration of language under a blood-red moon. Now that would surely put diffraction books on the literary map. Almost 1,000 text messages later, and following some unique printing and bookbinding challenges, a limited run of 1,000 copies of the unnamed black book had been ordered. Pristine, matte black, leatherette covers, nothing at all written upon them. Inside, 76 entirely black, blank pages which Cubit insisted were primed with the special ink of his own devising. He'd liaised with the printer directly. Thorncroft had not been involved. And is this really going to work? Thorncroft whispered as Cubit stirred one sugar cube into his Earl Grey with quiet concentration. The spoon's motion continued for a moment, then froze. Of course, it will be unforgettable, Cubit said with a facsimile of a smile. 3 hours later, following a highly uncomfortable dinner with Cubit and Ms. Bell, Thorncroft stood on Westbrook Sands as darkness fell and the full moon rose into the thankfully cloudless stage where the drama would be enacted. Over 100 of their invited guests had shown up. Tracy Emin was there with her artistic coterie, laughing raucously as they awaited the passage of the sun's shadow. It was rumoured that one of Emin's crowd was graffiti legend Banksy. Perhaps he could be persuaded to daub the exterior of the diffraction headquarters. One of the libertines was certainly present. Thorncroft couldn't remember which, possibly the bassist, clanking a wine bottle against another guest's metal leg. The great and the good of Margate, Kent, Essex and the capital were all present and correct. Of course, the incipient midsummer eclipse had much to do with it, and Thorncroft felt irritated as he smelt the heady reek of marijuana and noted the presence of a dozen or so local youths gawking at the scene from the seawall. But these were details, otherwise he couldn't be happier. Now where was Cubit? He'd left dinner in something of a hurry, muttering darkly about preparations, and Thorncroft had idly wondered whether he'd planned to change into a flamboyant outfit reminiscent of the Rio Carnival. More worryingly, the books hadn't yet been delivered to the nearby marquee where the drinks were set up, and the string quartet playing a specially commissioned Lunar lullaby were nearing the end of their 12-minute piece. Then a sound interrupted Thorncroft's troubled ruminations, a chugging, belching, mechanical sound. The crowd murmured appreciatively as a tractor rounded the concrete bulwark of the seawall, pulling a wooden trailer across the sand. Cubit sat behind the wheel, driving with an easy familiarity, yet still listing to his left as if mildly drunk. His only indicator of celebration was the thin, dark cigar he puffed upon, and he halted his vehicle and jumped down with unexpected nimbleness. "Avail yourselves of the text," Cubit cried, "and await the moon's clarity. Roundly now." Thorncroft wondered why the urgency, given that Cubit had kept his audience waiting for almost 45 minutes. Then Jez Bell appeared at his elbow and whispered, "It's starting," and Thorncroft squinted up at the night sky. Framed in a spatter of stars, the full moon now wore a sliver of red, like a shawl coquettishly draped over one shoulder. The eclipse was underway. The crowd rushed for the wagon behind the tractor and everyone grabbed a brown paper-wrapped package. Thorncroft had been forced by discomfort to sit down upon the mildly damp sand, so Jez brought her boss a copy of the unnamed text. He unwrapped it eagerly, accompanied by the sound of almost 100 others doing the same. The apex of a publisher's day, unwrapping a new book, albeit, in this case, one that looked entirely blank. A night-dark notebook in a midnight jacket, a forbidding nothingness. Thorncroft squinted at the pages, blacker than any he'd ever seen. Had he been duped? Was there nothing there at all? Wouldn't that be the perfect act of trolling? Was Cubit in fact an actor hired by a conspiracy of disgruntled authors, peeved by their invisible royalties and continued obscurity. Cubit had promised, Thorncroft remembered, that the secret ink will reveal all in one blissful, irretrievable instant. Had he said secret, Thorncroft might have heard sacred. None more black, Jess muttered, blowing a strand of purple fringe away from her eyes as she flicked through the slim, bleak volume. Thorncroft did not reply, wiping a layer of salty perspiration from his head with a crumpled ball of brown paper. "Hold your books up to the blood-red moon," ordered Cubit, now standing on the trailer as if it were a stage. The assembled crowd did as they had been requested. Cubit's tone was commanding. The laughter and chatter subsided into silence. Only the occasional click and whir of cameras punctuated the moment. Even the seagulls fell silent as a red wash suffused the face of the moon. The Earth's shadow fell upon the lunar surface, a rare occasion. One whose light wavelengths were supposedly uniquely attuned to cue the transformation of Cubit's black book into readable text. "Rifle the pages like the wings of birds. My work needs an airing." The assembled glitterati and literati duly rifled, the susurrant sound echoing the low tide's distant surges. Thorncroft was abruptly yanked to his feet by his assistant, and they both stood like supplicants, arms outstretched, flicking the black, blank pages. "There, I see something!" a remote voice cried out. "Emmons?" More voices joined the delight, as something silverish grey did seem to write itself upon the pages held aloft. Thorncroft pulled the book towards his chest in wonder, as overlapping spirals of text appeared on every page, overwriting one another, animated, fleeting, almost wriggling, allowing only the occasional fragment to be read before it vanished again. "A tourniquet around a bleeding tongue rolled the chariots of morning." And they shattered into one another like vases. Corollaries of darkness. A scream! Something had caught fire. Was someone burning one of the books? Thorncroft felt rage suffuse him. That would be one of the local oiks. No, more flame sprang into being to his right. A woman he vaguely recognised from Thanet District Council dropped her flaming book, blowing on singed fingertips. Then, more and more of the book spontaneously ignited, scalding fingers, crisping expensive sleeves, until guests began to hurl their books aside. As they hit the ground, the tomes exploded into red embers. Thorncroft felt, rather than saw, the book in his own hands blossom into flame. He instinctively dropped it like a red-hot coal. Something had gone horribly, horribly wrong. Small fires were blazing everywhere, as if a meteorite had struck the beach. People were yelling, cursing, laughing, singing. Jez Bell was stamping her own text out. Only one individual stood stonily silent, unmoved by the lunacy. Cubit balanced upon the wooden trailer, gazing up at the moon, ignoring the chaos all around him. Its crimson, reflected light finally made his cadaverous countenance look alive, as the poet wore just the sliver of a self-satisfied smile. I thank you. And there you go. Very strange tale, slightly surreal, which popped into my mind as a result of the combination of those random words. You see, this random word methodology, unusual though it may be, can be highly inspiring. And I'll be back very soon, perhaps with some insight into the writing methods, perhaps with some news. Who knows? But I will be back. I won't make you wait 3 weeks. I'll see you very soon. Thanks for listening. Bye.